Hello and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 20th of February 2026. We have an action-packed show for you this week, a content-packed show for you this week, which I'm just going to run through straight away before I talk to Sarah at all. We're going to talk about Emer Culleton in the Irish Times, writing about how Irish boys are a threat to women and their mothers are trying to raise them not to be. We're going to talk about Seamus Culleton's adventures in North America as he continues his quest to avoid being deported back to Ireland. We're going to talk about the letter sent by President Macron to French 29-year-olds telling them to have their babies pronto. We're going to talk about the tax crisis afflicting the Irish state. We're going to go through the unions in RTE, the price of pancakes being up, and Sinn Féin saying they won't go to the White House with Donald Trump. So there's an awful lot of stuff there. Oh, and some transgender person killed committed another crime over in North America. Sarah wanted to mention that. Sarah, how are you?
That was a
You hate them old trannies.
Yeah. We could just, at this point, we could just make it a regular feature that, mental illness strikes again. And there's just been another unfortunate mass killing of somebody who's perfectly mentally sane.
Well, talking about conditions of the mind, let's open up with, because I was at home, I was minding my own business this afternoon. And my phone popped and I looked down and there was a message from Sarah. Always a pleasure to get a message from Sarah. And it was basically like, just, do you have Irish Times sub? And I was like, yes, I do. And then she sent me this link to this article about Emer Culleton. So naturally, being a good friend, I copied and pasted it and sent it to Sarah, who's freeloading on the Irish Times journalist. Good work by reading it without a subscription. But you were very, very eager to read it. And what were your conclusions and what was the article about, and tell the people why you're so exercised by it.
Well, I'm glad I didn't pay for the subscription, because then I read the article. And if I had read the article, I would have been enraged. And also, we're not in a pandemic and I don't need toilet paper. So thank you very much. And I was vindicated, absolutely vindicated, by not having an Irish Times subscription, by the absolute garbage that you sent me, which is an article by Emer Culleton about how she's glad she doesn't have kids because all her friends who have sons are raising them, spending all their time worrying about them being horrible people, and hoping that they're gay so that they'll at least be sure that they'll have some empathy. Basically another demonstration. I mean, I wish I was more surprised, but another demonstration of a female incel getting
that's harsh. We can't be 100% sure there what her personal status is, but
Or what? Female incel. I mean, male incels are people who are on the internet and hate women. This is a person who's on the internet and hates men. What's the difference?
Okay, if that's the definition you're using, I'll go with it.
Well, so in some of the descriptions of male incels, they can't get women. I mean, I don't know anything about that.
Fair enough.
But it is an article about hating women or hating boys. It is full-on misandry, a platform for full misandry, talking about how boys who are from birth need to be parented differently, and the hope is that they're gay so that they'll have some empathy. I reject it in the strongest of terms. I have 2 sons. My friends all have sons. Nearly all of my friends have at least 1 son. Some have 2, some have 3. None of us as mothers have conversations about how we spend 30% of our parenting brain, as it says in the article, on just the concern about our sons growing up. I mean, it's just absolutely offensive, garbage, more man bashing. Would never happen if it was the other way around. If David Quinn wrote an article in the Irish Times about how people have to spend a lot of their brain raising their daughters to not be sluts or something, there'd be an absolute national investigation. So what's the difference? And I've said on the podcast before, it's easier for me to say it, but you just would be weary of the man bashing from birth. The minute you come out, you are subject to accusations of what's going on in your head, concerns about what you're going to grow up to be. We don't do that to girls. We should do it to neither. And I'm tired of it. I think man bashing is de rigueur. Boys are bad. And I think that this stupid cow should stick her article where the sun don't shine and leave parenting and conversations about little boys to people who actually have kids and know what they're talking about.
Yeah, but in fairness, I'm reading the article here. What she says is, and just for the avoidance of doubt, remember, if you listen to this podcast, what I said last week about devil's advocate, we have to discuss issues fairly. I'll give you my view in a moment. But she says, most mothers are worrying. The ones I know who are worrying the most are the women in my life who are raising boys. One mother says that she spends about 1/3 of her parenting brain power devoted to this. She's terrified of keeping dialogue open. Every mother of sons I spoke to demonstrated how much they're engaging in these efforts to raise good men, by which she was on to say she doesn't mean men who commit acts of violence or sexual violence against women. So is there not an argument that says what she's thinking about here is kind of like the fact that young boys now live in an environment that I didn't when I was like 10, 11, 12. That, you know, there's loads of, if you've got a Sky subscription or one of those, you know, dodgy box things at home, it's not just RT1 and RT2. You can now watch all sorts of violent TV programs. There's porn. There's the influence of what is said maybe in young boys' dressing rooms. There's Snapchat. There's phones. Is that maybe, if there's a case to be made that that's what she's talking about, and give her the benefit of the doubt?
Well, that piss poor argument might hold some water if, in fact, she didn't say that the preference was for the boys to grow up gay, because that's how you could be sure that they had empathy. Because young gay boys are also have access to porn, have access to all kinds of things. This is an attack on young straight males, because it suits her to keep her gay friends on side. So she has to do the caveat for them while she slates young boys. So no, I don't think that there's an argument to be made. And I don't think that women who actually have children and boys, loads of little boys, most little boys have empathy, like kids are kids. Why not the attack on girls? It's an attack on girls, and she's caveating it with the gay boys, and hopefully that they'll grow up gay, because that's the only way you can be sure that they have empathy. It's absolute misandry. You wouldn't do it in any other situation. You wouldn't get away with it anywhere else. And it's the old reliable kick the boys thing. It always lands well, always plays well to gallery. And I think it's offensive. I've loads of friends, as I said, who have boys. They're not having these stupid conversations. This is a made up thing. This is like, she's not canvassing around to all her friends. She's not canvassing around to all her female friends who have sons. And they're all saying, yeah, I'm really worried about my son growing up to be a sex pest. That's not happening.
Well, she's canvassing around to somebody, because this is what strikes me about it. I tend not to get too annoyed about individual articles in newspapers, but I'm always interested in what they tell us. So Emer McLysaght, for those listeners who don't know, not a regular journalist. She's not a kind of like just a staff writer at the Irish Times. She's actually a very successful novelist. She's the co-author, along with Sarah, sorry, I've forgotten her second name, but she's a co-author of the Aisling novels, which were very popular amongst women of this generation. I think you read them, Sarah, which chronic like basically the life of a millennial young Irish woman as she kind of navigates all the kind of gas stuff like being abroad and not having access to potatoes or whatever the humour is. Massively successful. She's a fixture on the cultural scene in Dublin. Obviously, been on the Late Late Show, been on all the RTE shows, got the Fawning interviews, done Miriam O'Callaghan, all this sort of stuff. Cultural fixture. And it strikes me that she was able to write this article without, for one moment, fearing that it would do her any harm. She was basically able to write an article that said, wouldn't it be better if all young, straight, white men were gay, because they wouldn't hurt us so much? And she was able to write it in the full knowledge that, you know, Miriam O'Callaghan wouldn't be sending out a tweet kind of going, oh, this is a bit bad. That Una Mullally wouldn't be saying, oh, I don't know if we should have published that in the Irish Times. That none of her contacts in the theatre world or the cultural setting in Dublin or the book world, no one in the book world would have said, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't be publishing books by this woman who thinks that, you know, young boys should be gay to avoid hating women. The point is, her opinion is entirely acceptable. Nobody in the Irish Times, when they read that copy, kind of went, maybe we shouldn't publish that. That might annoy people. All of these people in this little incestuous world that passes for a cultural elite in Ireland, and there's big overlap with the political and social elite, of course, as well. It's the kind of thing you can say with complete and utter impunity. That is the real problem. The real problem isn't that one idiot woman thinks these things and writes them in a newspaper. It is that there is absolutely no cultural barrier against her doing so. There's nobody who will stick up a hand and go, that, madam, is a load of fucking nonsense.
But
There's
they
no one to say
think
it,
it, John.
apart from
But
us.
they think it. They think it at home. Like, I know that people don't agree with that in the majority. I know that people at home, because people approach you and me all the time and say, I know that the people think that there's an attack on men, that men make huge contributions to society, that these people who are sitting around in their theatres and delivering their books are driven by truck drivers and electricians and people who, as I've said before, fix the electricity when it goes out, etc., etc. That men are really good fathers and grandfathers grandfathers are a huge part of society, but they're just, it's like the age old kind of bullying thing. Kick the weakest person. And at the moment, it's de rigueur to kick boys and men. And I've just had it up to my tits with it, frankly.
All right. Well, we'll full pack podcast. We'll move on a little bit. You talked about kicking. Do you want to say something else?
I was going to say, I don't believe that any mother is spending 30% of their time worrying about their son growing up to be an incel any more than I'm probably not going to spend 30% of my time trying to not raise my daughter to end up like Emer Lycett.
I'd say there's a mother or two out there. I don't think Emer McLycett was making it up. In that cultural set, there definitely are. There are lots of young boys out there being raised in particular ways that I'm not entirely sure are going to do them justice in the long term. There are. Well, I know some teachers. I have encountered it in the real world.
And I think most people, like rational adults, raise their kids in the best way they can, to be kind, to be nice to other people, to not, to not bully people, to not hate people for no reason, to not hate people you don't know. Emer could take a leaf out of that book. But ultimately, I don't sit my sons down and teach them that there's something in them that I need to train out of them. And that is just simply wrong. And I'm not. And I'm not in the minority, and it's a hill I will die on. I think most people agree with me on this.
Yeah, can I just say one thing as well on this? Just because this is something that's important to say. Because one of the things, and I knew I was going to move on, but this actually came into my head, and it's an important thing to say. One of the things that annoys me so much about this is the idea that you can teach men not to be rapists or not to be sexually violent towards women. As if there is a single man out there who forces himself sexually on a woman or hits a woman or is violent, who doesn't in his soul know that what he's doing is wrong. People don't do it because they're not educated not to do it. They do it because they are criminals with terrible impulse control and oftentimes deep-seated psychological maladies, some of which I suspect comes from the parenting. A lot.
But what she's also saying, which is actually kind of funny because it's misogynistic in itself, is saying that if you are that, it's because your mother didn't do what all her wonderful friends are doing. And therefore, we come full circle again, that it's actually the woman's fault.
It's actually the woman's fault. The woman's fault. Well, Emer McLycett won't come on this show to discuss it.
That's a pity, John.
Years.
That's a pity.
But anyway, she's after the young men. Very briefly, we'll deal with somebody who's after the young women because President Macron of La France, you wanted to talk about this last week. We ran out of time. We'll deal with it briefly today. He's written a letter to all the 29-year-old women of France, basically, hasn't he? He said, basically, get on your horse. Well, get on your horse or get up on something else and get making babies. And
no, he wrote it to the boys as well.
Oh, was it them as well? All right.
Yeah, he wrote it to the boys as well. Okay. And I was struck by the comedy show on Virgin Media, when they were discussing it on their afternoon show with horror, and there was a lot of pearl clutching and whatever, and it was just terrible to reduce people down to their reproductive organs or whatever. But
was this Gavin and Richard and the other lady?
No,
okay.
I can't remember their names. Anyway.
The one you used to be on. Yes, the one you used to be on.
No, that doesn't exist anymore. But
okay.
But good to know.
Okay, some show on. I
some
don't watch
show on
TV.
Virgin Media that's on in the afternoon, late morning, early afternoon, and it has a guy who used to be Greg. Something is on it, I think. Anyway, and they're all horrified at this reduction of human beings down to their reproductive organs. Blah 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 blah. But I actually think the opposite. You will all be shocked. I think that it's all very well to sit on a TV show and say this is a disgrace and, women shouldn't be told this or whatever. But for every 29-year-old who's outraged, there's a 36-year-old who's sitting in a fertility clinic somewhere being told that actually her peak fertile years are behind her and nobody ever told her. And I think we do. Your fertility is infinite is one of the top 3 lies that we tell women all the time, probably followed by, big is beautiful and that guy's not texting you back because he's just really busy at work. But like the idea that we lie to women and tell them that they can have their career, and you've had like years of this stuff where companies are like dark companies paying for women to freeze their eggs and being completely dishonest on what the actual rate of return and the likelihood of a living baby after all of that process has gone through. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with a government that has a collapsing birth rate, as we do here, reminding people that your fertility has a limit. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But of course, everybody's outraged in Ireland because free to be you and me until, have a baby when you're 45 and see how that works out.
Well, I'm not outraged. I just think it's fairly ineffective. I mean, do you take it, if you get one of these as a young man, do you just kind of go up to a 29-year-old woman and go, look, I got my letter from Macron. Did you get yours? Should we do something about it? This is a new chat up line. It's like, I don't know how it changes the circumstances people are in that mean they don't want to have kids.
But it doesn't change the circumstances, John. But you and I would talk all the time about things that there's an action or there's a thing, and that it changes a culture or it starts a change in culture. I don't think anybody is sitting down with a spreadsheet saying, well, we sent that letter on that date, the 1st of January, and 9 months later, what increase in live births was there 9 months after we sent the letter? I don't think it's about that. But I think that a lot of countries, certainly across Europe, across the world, have these falling birth rates. And there's not one reason for that. There's cultural reasons. There's people there's more single people than ever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But starting to school 29-year-olds, because when you're 29, you think you're going to live forever and, whatever. Starting a kind of a conversation with them or trying to move the dial culturally towards even an awareness of their fertility, I think is a good move.
I don't really disagree with you. There's no real conflict between us on this point. I just, I think it's kind of a little bit of government tokenism, so we'll write a letter and tell them all that they should have babies. And I mean, ultimately the thing is, there's nothing governments can do here. People either want to have children or they don't. And I am a bit of a heretic on the whole pronatalist thing, in that I think some of my very dear friends who believe very strongly that they need to have a pronatalist policy kind of take this view that people aren't having babies because of the government. It's nothing to do with the government. It's to do with the fact that we're wealthier, that there's a cultural expectation that you should do your education, that you should get a career, that you should be in a good place financially before you get married, that these are the decisions that are promoted as the sensible decisions over the years. It's not to do with government policy. It is still a case that I challenge anybody who's listening to this podcast, if they have a grandchild maybe, or they have a daughter, and you have a 21-year-old daughter, and you've sent her off to college, that 21-year-old daughter, or indeed 21-year-old son, your 21-year-old son comes home from his first year in DIT or DCU or somewhere and says, Mum, I've met this girl, she's from Kerry, we're engaged, we're getting married next month, and she's pregnant. Like, would you react with, oh yeah, that's great, son, I'm pronatalist, this is brilliant news? I don't think most of you would, because the cultural expectations have been reset. And I don't think a government can unset those cultural expectations. Just
fine. But I think you're right on that, on the first child. Where government policy does come into it, John, is on the third and fourth child. So if you want to have children, you're having children, fine. The government, you're having them at the age you want to have them or whatever. But there's absolutely no doubt about it that government policies do affect whether people have third or fourth children, because that starts to get into cost, mat leave, childcare, and whatnot. So it's not that the government encouraging you to have a baby makes you go, oh my God, I never thought of it that way, I think I'll have a baby. It's that when you're sitting down and doing your finances, and I have 3 children, one of my closest friends has 4, but most of my friends are 2 and through, or 3. That's kind of the lid. And a lot of my friends, it's financial. And it's financial because if you have your children later in life, as in your 30s, you have to have them closer together because you're getting older. So you probably have them, let's just say, a year or 2 apart, which means that at any given time, you might have 2 children in a childcare, in a creche, 1 child in primary school, and that needs an after school, whatever. So I know people who have 3 kids or 4 kids, and their childcare bill a month is $2,000. So if you've got 2 kids and you're thinking about a third, and then you think, well, if I have a third, I need a different car. I might need a different house. I now have to pay for a crash again. I now, that's government policy. It's the third and fourth, John, that are affected.
Okay, I take that point. I still don't know how Macron's letter fixes it, but I do take that point.
Well, because I think, but to just to finish, I think that the first or maybe the second reason why you don't have a third or fourth child is financial. But the other reason is this: the later you start, the less children statistically you're going to be able to have. So if you have your first child at 36, 37, do the maths. You're probably not having a fourth or a fifth because you're well into your 40s or whatever. So the earlier you start, you might have two, and then you might have a gap of 5 years, and then you might have another one or two. Government policy and age are the two limiting factors for children having more, or for people having more children. And they do play a part. The government do play a part in that.
All right, fair enough. We will leave that topic there and move on to something of sort of more comic interest, because it is now kind of comic interest, because we talked about it last week. We devoted the title of the podcast and a lot of the podcast last week to talking about the Seamus Culleton case. I'm kind of like at the point now where somebody sent me yesterday, and I'm talking about it in the context of why I decided not to do the story on the website, which means obviously I'm being a hypocrite because I'm talking about it on the podcast. But somebody sent me that Twitter thread that purported to dig up his divorce in 2019 and alleged calls by the police to his residence in Boston and all that sort of stuff. By the way, there's no suggestion at all of wrongdoing on his behalf, just that there were calls made to a residence in which he was resident. Obviously, the Seamus Culleton story has kind of like, I'm just kind of amazed at the way in which this guy's going public has backfired on him completely. And I'm almost at the stage, on a human level, I'm sorry, now there'll be some people who kind of get irrationally angry with me about this in the comments, because like everyone who is their cultural enemy they have to hate. I feel a little bit sorry for the guy. I think he's suffering reputational destruction, as well as obviously what's happening with his immigration system. And it kind of just feels a bit like, there's a human being in there who probably doesn't deserve this. Or am I being too soft?
Ooh, John, do you think a guy who fecks off to America and leaves 2 kids behind is that concerned about his reputation?
Well, you see, the problem is there. I read the article by the daughters, and he, one of the things about this is the thing about illegal immigration into the United States is that even had he, and I don't know, I've never spoken to the man, even had he wanted to come home and be a father to those 2 girls, he wouldn't have been able to go back to the US. Once he left, he wasn't able to go. I know in 2018 he missed his own father's funeral, for example, wasn't able to come home because of the situation into which he put himself. I also, I don't like the airing of personal family dramas like that in the media. I'm not saying anything about the young women involved who probably have, most people will say they have a right to tell their story. I just don't think it's very edifying. That's my honest opinion. I'm not going to lie to the viewers on it. I just don't think it's very edifying. It's not directly relevant to his immigration case or anything like that. It's just a kind of like, our dad's a bad dude who left us at home.
Yeah, and look, people who grow up with an absent father feel it very deeply, as is my understanding. And that's the way they feel about it, and they feel strongly enough about it that they did an interview with a media outlet. So that's a matter for themselves. I think that I think that as more and more information has come out, like when we were talking about it last week, I didn't really know what the charges were, and I thought it was just a simple matter that he'd failed to appear in something. It obviously seems like it's a little bit more than that now. But ultimately, none of that really changes. It's all very humorous and interesting to watch politicians completely row back when they were all for him because they thought they had, Donald Trump's immigration policy on the hook. But ultimately, I just still come down in the same position, regardless of all the noise around him, which is that he was an illegal in America. That's the system they have. Lots of people in Ireland have done it. They accept that they're living there at a risk, and when your time runs out, your time runs out, and that's it.
Yeah, I had an argument with our mutual friend. In fact, I had a dinner with him at your house, Carl Dieter, on the Niall Boylan show about this during the week. Yeah, I mean, I worry about because I think an immigration system, an immigration enforcement system, if you're going to enforce immigration law, you've got to enforce it fairly. You can't just have, some of the rhetoric on the right about this has kind of gotten out of control in terms of what is practical and what is achievable. If you take the view that people who have entered your country illegally should be removed from it, which is a view I agree and support. Seamus Culleton is in the United States illegally. He broke immigration law. He actually perpetuated a fraud on the United States because he signed a document, the ESTA, saying I will go and I will leave after 90 days. And then he broke that promise. He's there fraudulently. He perpetrated fraud on the American people, and they have every right to remove him. But there's also an obligation to impose that law quickly. And one of the things that's happened with immigration law, both in the US and here, is that people are not removed quickly, and therefore they have the opportunity to stay and build up a life. He has been in the United States since 2008, 2009. He's apparently been married now twice. He set up a business. He employs people. He has no criminal record. Notwithstanding those reports about cops visiting his home or whatever, he has no criminal record. He's been allowed by the American government, both federal and state, to build a life over there. And then they come along 10, 12 years later and try to uproot him. There's a saying in law that you would be familiar with about justice delayed being justice denied. And you can say, oh, well, Trump has come in and cleaned house. Well, this is no commentary on Donald Trump at all. It's a commentary on, what happens in a country when you let immigration law go unenforced for so long, is that you create these horrific situations. And I think that the Irish government, far from being out supporting Seamus Culleton, which they're clearly not going to do now, should be taking a lesson from this and kind of going, we can't afford to be in a situation where we are creating a whole load of people in Seamus Culleton-like situations in Ireland, who in 10, 15 years' time, another government might come along and say, well, you've got to go home, or you've got to go home. And the upheaval that causes. It would be much better for everyone concerned if the immigration laws were just enforced at the time when they were broken. But that's not a conversation anyone here wants to have.
Yeah, but it's also, we are where we are, and he's living there illegally. And when you start to clean house, as you say, people will, the process will be sped up, and people will be, he knows he's there illegally. He had the option to go home at any point. He didn't. He chose to take that risk.
But this has turned into a PR.
The longer you're there, the more ties you have and whatever. But that's your own adult decision.
This has turned into a PR, gold mine for the Trump administration, because they've had a rough few weeks on the immigration front, leading up to this. They've obviously had what happened in Minneapolis. They've had the fact that the entire Minneapolis operation has been cancelled and pulled out after 4,000 arrests, which sounds like a lot, but it works out at one arrest per illegal immigrant per 50 officers per day, while the troops were deployed up there. So nowhere near as big as they thought it would be in a city of, I think, 400,000 people. And obviously there's been the Renee Good issue and the other guy, and, Trump's approval rating on immigration has sunk. And then along comes Seamus Culleton with his, classic Irish leprechaun visage. I don't say that pejoratively. I just mean he's white and pasty like the rest of us. And his ginger hair and his big muscles. He looks like a lad who'd beat you up in the street. He's, or could, not would. He's the perfect avatar of the fighting Irishman. And they're like, no, we're sending him home too. See, it's not just the Hispanics. It's not just the Cubans. And by the way, look, we've got him banged to rights. And there's uproar coming from this about Ireland, but absolutely not reinforce our laws. It's a PR goldmine. He's handed the Trump administration a massive stick to beat their opponents with. And I just think it's the most badly conceived of PR campaign in living memory. No?
Yeah. But it's more entertaining or interesting, or whatever the word would be, to watch the silence now from the people who are outraged in our Irish political class. And now
I was talking to a government minister about this during the week, and I was like, "Come on, what are you going to do?" And he's like, "Well, obviously the campaign was designed to get them to raise it with Trump in the White House to make this kind of thing." I was like, "There's no fucking chance we'll be doing that now, lads." So he's just going to get the consular support and nothing more. Which, again, I come back. You can't blame a lad for trying. He chanced his arm. It didn't work. It blew up in his face. And again, on a human level, I've some sympathy with the dude who presumably just wants to stay and live his life in Boston with his new wife and his business. But he can't do it because he did it the wrong way. Tough titties. as they say. Let's move on. The big news at home this week, we've kind of done a lot of cultural stuff. Let's turn to matters economic. The big news at home this week came from the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, which revealed that Ireland is now so dependent on three multinational companies, which I believe, though IFAC didn't name them, are Apple, Microsoft, and Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical drugs maker, now pay one half of all our corporate taxes. What do you think of that?
That is scary.
Is it though?
Yeah, it is.
I'm going to bat for the government on this one for a minute, just for a minute.
Right.
I was talking to somebody who's in not. No, I was going to say something that might potentially identify them. Somebody in the government today, and I was like, you're in a bit of trouble here. And he basically said, and I'm going to leave, I know it's the third time I've used the F word in the podcast, but it's not me using it, it's somebody else. And he says, what the fuck do people want us to do? Tell them not to give us the money. And I mean, it's a fair point. The government has attracted these companies here. It's set the tax rate. It's been successful, or successive governments, not this government. It's attracted them in. It's set the tax rate. There's a global boom. These companies are now paying legitimately loads of tax towards the Irish state. Is the Irish state supposed to go, no thanks? And that was his position. And he said to me, I have an article on this for Gript on Friday. He basically said, look, there's nothing we could do on this that the public would support. There's nothing we could do on the public would support. So like, basically, if people remember back to the 2008 financial crisis, it was stamp duty then, as you know, that was powering the economy. There was this massive boom in stamp duty and construction. And then all of a sudden that bubble burst. And the amount of money, and I think it went from about 5 billion down to about like $500 million inside 3 years, revenues from that sector, blowing this massive $4.5 billion hole in the public finances at a time when the economy was in the tank. And if people think back, if they're old enough to when Enda Kenny came into power in 2011, do you remember all the chat about we have to broaden the tax base? We can never become so dependent again on one leg of the stool. We have to have like a situation where we're hedged against kind of like becoming over dependent. And then that government was the most fiscally prudent government probably in the history of the state, to the extent that the Labour Party got absolutely obliterated by the voters in 2016. Wiped out because they hadn't spent enough money. And then Fine Gael learned that lesson and they've doubled public spending ever since. So this politician is basically saying, what do you expect us to do? We've done nothing that the voters didn't want us to do. And are we to blame for the fact that all these companies are making loads of money? So what do you think is the answer to that?
I mean, no, I think I kind of agree in principle that no one's expecting them to turn it away. The issue is that, if you were investing money, you always hear about when you have a portfolio, you diversify, you have money in different things. And it is scary to have an economy that has such dependency on three companies. I'm not saying it's scary doesn't mean that there's an alternative. No one's suggesting they turn it away. The question will be, is there a contingency plan in place for, one or two of those companies gets wiped out by AI within the next 3 years? Is there a contingency plan in place for a pharmaceutical catastrophe in pharmaceuticals? Is there a contingency plan in place for, I don't know. Like, I'm not an economist and I'm not on the payroll of the government. My issue would be, if you use your analogy, is there somebody sitting around saying, lessons were learned from the whole stamp duty thing, let's have a contingency in place for the fact that 50% of our entire economy is based on three companies? And I would be concerned that the answer to that would be no.
No, it's not 50% of the entire economy. It's 50% of the corporate tax base. But it's a massive chunk of government money. Yeah. If you take it out of the pot, if that were to disappear overnight. It's a massive
chunk of our economy is what I meant to say.
And bear in mind, by the way, people often forget this. This is only money they pay on their profits. That is, for this money to go away, it doesn't mean that they have to pack up and go home or close down or anything like that. It just means that their profits need to fall precipitously, and all of a sudden, they're no longer paying that tax. That's the risk.
But it's also that their profits fall down, and it's also not as simple as just a number, because economically their numbers go down and then they start making cuts and they stop allowing the staff to use taxis to go to the local to go to the airport. So the taxi company, they stop paying for sandwich companies to come in and pay for and bring sandwiches in every Friday. So the local catering companies feel it, etc., etc., etc. Do you know what I mean? They do a few layoffs. So it's 50% of the corporation tax, but it's a huge chunk of the economy.
Yes.
And there's knock-on consequences. And I agree. Like, nobody's saying that they should say no to it, but the kind of like, what else do you want us to do thing is a bit limited.
But the problem is it can't be fixed. The problem is what's already happened. So the problem is that the government has doubled spending from 2015 to the present day. In 11 years, it has doubled the entire budget. It is now spending, for I think every euro it spent in 2015, it is now spending €2.10. This is more than doubled the budget. I sent Ben along this week to ask Jennifer Carroll McNeil, like, what have we gotten for, when Fine Gael came into office in 2011, health spending was, I think, €15 billion per year. It is now €28 billion a year. So we have pumped, it's not quite doubled, but we pumped in another €13 billion over the course of Fine Gael being in government in annual spend. So that's not €13 billion, that's €13 billion every year, which over the last 10 years is well over €100 billion of public money, because revenue is recurring. So if you think what we pumped into health over the last 10 years, we are talking multiple hundreds of billions of euro have been pumped into the health system. For what? That's the problem. What do we have to show for it? And that's not saying that it'd be grand, by the way, if we did have something to show for it, because even if we had something to show for it, doubling the budget has left us massively exposed. The government is massively exposed to a revenue shock, because for all that the headline figures look good, if you're running a business, like as I run Gript and my colleagues run Gript, we always have something called headroom, which is what happens if 500 people, tomorrow I write an article that finally sends them over the edge, and 500 people on the same day kind of go, I'm not subscribing anymore. Do we have headroom? Does the state have headroom if that happens with corporation tax? It doesn't. It doesn't because the public spending decisions have already been made. And the kicker, as I say, is that the public supported it. There's no politician in this country who would ever win an election or who has ever campaigned for an election thinking that he'd win votes by kind of going, well, I'm actually going to spend less because we need to be prudent in case the corporation tax goes tits up. It doesn't happen. The one government that we ever had that was prudent ended with the Labour Party getting absolutely turfed out of office, from which they've yet to recover because they didn't spend enough money. The Irish voter does not appreciate restraint.
Well, then we're just we're in it.
In its history, has Fianna Fáil ever run an election campaign saying we'll spend less? In its history,
no. But no one has.
No, that's sadly true. That's sadly true. I think Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government of 1983 went around for re-election did, but I think that's the only one I can remember in living memory. All right, we'll move on and talk about something else. Sinn Féin, Mary Lou McDonald, says she's not going to the White House this year. Do you think Donald Trump will miss her?
Oh God, why do we have to do this every year? It's so silly. It's so kind of childish, isn't it? Who cares? Don't go. I mean, like, one of the things I would say, and I have to give Micheál credit for this. You go to the White House and you do the thing because there's loads of economic and important implications for Ireland. So you just do the thing. And Micheál's doing it. So good for him. Credit where it's due. Get on with it. You don't like him, we know. But like Mary Lou doing this song and dance every year, the opposition, and I wouldn't go and I wouldn't do this. You would, yeah, if you're a Taoiseach. You would, yeah.
Well, she's openly said as much. Last year, in 2025, she said that she wasn't going, but that Micheál Martin absolutely should go. Which is the most bizarre position I think I've ever heard anyone take. Because if you come back on this and you listen to this podcast and maybe you're thinking of voting for Sinn Féin or whatever, and I'm not telling you not to, it's your vote, do what you want with it. Sinn Féin's reason for not going to the White House has nothing to do with Ireland. Nothing to do with the peace process, nothing to do with we don't like Donald Trump, nothing to do with what's happening in Minnesota with immigration, nothing to do with tariffs. It is because Sinn Féin want to protest what's happening in Gaza, where there is no war because there's a peace deal. They don't think the peace deal was sufficiently friendly to the Palestinians. Therefore, they are not going to go. So this is a protest on behalf of the good people of Palestine, who, of course, Sinn Féin regards primarily as their primary and most important constituents. But if I was a voter in Palestine who just elected my Sinn Féin TD in Waterford or whatever, as they apparently did, I'd be a little bit annoyed because Mary Lou McDonald is saying on the one hand, well, I'm going to stand up for the Palestinians and I am not going to go and talk to Donald Trump when she's leader of the opposition. When she's leader of the opposition, and it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. But she's also saying that the Taoiseach should go, which implies heavily that she would go if she was the Taoiseach, which means that the moment she had any bit of feckin' power at all to do anything for her constituents down in Khan Yunis, she would say, sure, feck you, I'm going to go and talk to Donald Trump. It is so ridiculously ludicrous and cynical. And she gets clean away with it, again, because nobody in the media wants to challenge her, because that might involve some journalist somewhere sounding somewhat little bit less than perfectly sympathetic to Gaza, which, of course, would get them kicked out of most polite society in Dublin. But it's ludicrous, isn't it?
But, like, are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised.
The age of token politics, look.
Oh, I don't know. Have you been following this whole business? I know we discussed it briefly last week, this whole business of the football match, which is getting more and more deranged.
Do you ever just think, I need sus biog from the kind of mania? So no, I haven't been following it, but just tell me, go on.
Well, it's just because, I mean, we had people before Prophet Councillor suggesting that that the Israeli bus shouldn't be allowed to reach the stadium. We've had the Irish Examiner suggest that the match might be played overseas because the implication is that the safety of Israeli supporters, players and fans can't be guaranteed here. We've essentially had the entirety of Irish football kind of go, it's not fair, why hasn't UEFA banned Israel? But every competitive match that Israel has had since 2003 has been played. I think 15 matches in total. We're the first country even to request or consider requesting cancelling the match. No one else in Europe is talking about it. We're jumping up and down, and it seems to dominate the radio all week. And then we had that complete imbecile Richie Sadlier apparently going on the soccer thing to give a long, impassioned plea as to why we couldn't possibly play a game against the hated Israelis, while setting out a massive series of political arguments that went entirely unchallenged by the presenter, because it's a sports program where politics is apparently permitted so long as it's the right kind of politics. You get fucking sick of it. Like, it has become a national mental illness. And I don't care how many people hate me for saying this. Gaza has become an Irish national mental illness. There is nowhere else in Europe. There's not another country in Europe. There's not another single country outside the Muslim world where Gaza takes up as much time as it does here. It doesn't take up that much time in Egypt. I was in Morocco before Christmas, Muslim country, member of the Arab League. Do you know how many Palestinian flags I saw, Sarah? 0. Not one. Not one. In Ireland, it has become a form of mental illness, and an institutional mental illness that I would compare to the kind of institutional mental illness we saw during COVID, where people, otherwise sensible people, were walking around wearing face masks on a beach. Like, it's become a form of mental illness. That does not say, I'm not saying that to say you have to approve of what Israel did in Gaza or the way it fights its wars. I'm saying you've got to recognize this is a country of 4.5 million people on the west coast of Europe. I promise you the Israelis do not give a fiddler's what we think or do about anything. No one in Europe apparently gives a fiddler's about what we think on Gaza. No one in the UN thinks, but we are obsessed with what we think on Gaza, to the extent that we are now making a football match the most important, like, it's almost religious, this devotion to getting this football match cancelled. It will then have to either go ahead, in which case there'll be a massive security dilemma, or we'll have to say we can't guarantee the security of the Israelis. Then we've had the pattern where we can't guarantee the security of the Israeli football team. We tried to dename the only park in Dublin called after a Jew. We've had about 5 or 6 incidences that have gone viral internationally of people attacking Jews on the street and on buses and calling them names, and anti-Semitism. And then you still have the government insisting to a world that looks on with a kind of confusion, kind of going, oh no, Ireland isn't anti-Semitic at all. It's a small minority. Fuck off.
But John, you just reminded me that we have to give a shout out to Gary Gannon, who obviously listens to our podcast, because speaking of people, and Israel and Jews.
the only Jew in public life, and connect him to the Epstein files, and then have to apologise for it. Yeah.
And last week we said he wasn't very sound and he should probably apologise. And lo and behold, less than 24 hours later, he had released a statement saying that he was sorry and that they'd come to some kind of an agreement. So, hi Gary, thanks for listening.
All right. Look, we're actually making good progress through the list of topics. Can I just say that? Bad week for Kevin Backhurst out in RTE. SIP2 have rejected his proposed reforms. Now, for those of you who are wondering what those proposed reforms were, it was to reduce the number of RTE staff from, I think, roughly 3,000 down to about roughly 2,400. It was to move Fair City off-site. So it was, for those of you who've never been to the RTE campus, there's an actual Fair City. Carrickstown exists. It's kind of a series of cardboard buildings out the back. They're to move that off-site and have the production company make it. They'll do the same with the Late Late Show, have it independently produced. And they're going to reduce basically various terms and conditions to try and make it more financially viable. And SIP2 have said, no, not in your life. And the vote to reject the deal was I think it was 89 to 11, or certainly 90-10, or in that ballpark. So bad old week for Kevin Backhurst. If he can't get those cuts, there might be money there to bring back Ryan Tubridy at this rate, the way things are going.
What is that about?
What, the Tubridy thing?
Yeah.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It's so weird. Tubridy grand, whatever. I don't know him, but what is the obsession? I always just think surely to God there's 5 or 6 young people who've never got a shot, who are sitting in the wings, waiting in the wings for their big deal. And Tubridy is just back out, doing the round. I might get back with RTE someday. God, it's mental.
I can only assume, and I want to emphasize before I say this, because I know he's very litigious, that if this is happening, then it is completely legitimate and above board, and there's no wrongdoing happening whatsoever. But I can only assume that Ryan Tubridy's agent, Noel Kelly, is doing what any good agent would do and calling in a series of favours on behalf of his client. Kind of keep the Tubridy, because Tubridy's gone to America, he's gone to Britain, right? He's gone to Britain. He's done his show at Virgin Media. That has now ended by mutual consent. Let's just say the ratings did not set the world on fire over there in Britain. And I don't know how they could have, when he was simultaneously trying to simulcast it back to Ireland on various radio stations here. You can't. I mean, people in London don't give a shit what's happening in Clare. They don't.
Yeah.
Nor should they be expected to. So that's come to an end. He's now over here. He has, if you go and if you're watching this podcast on YouTube or indeed on Spotify or anywhere else, you can go and you can listen to Ryan Tubridy's Bookshelf, which is part of the podcast he's doing, where he reviews books. Nothing that I see there suggests that's setting the world on fire. So I think it's just kind of trying to drum up a bit of business. That's the only explanation I can think of. But why RTE are agreeing to it, I don't know, because it makes them look awful.
Yeah, but back to the point, I'm not surprised that SIP2 would reject all of those changes. And frankly, the time for those kind of reforms was when the government had to bail RTE out, and we found out about flip-flops and, nonsense stuff, and the way money was being spent by RTE. And now all the kind of heat has gone out of it. So I think it'll be exactly as we would have expected, which will be that ultimately no reforms will happen in RTE and the thing will just keep going as it is.
But SIP2 are 100% right to reject the deal.
Why? Because there's going to be layoffs. Yeah.
Sorry, no. I don't want to say right, because that implies moral value to what they're doing. SIP2 are 100% rational to reject the deal, because people who work in the private sector will understand this. Unions in the private sector tend to be weaker than unions in the public sector. Why is that? It's because if you are running a bacon factory, maybe that's a bad example, but you're running a factory and you've got workers on the shop on the floor who are unionized, and you've got management up above, and management come and say, here's a pay deal, and the workers say that isn't enough, and management says, look, if you don't give us the money, we're going to go bankrupt. And they bring the union guys in and they show them the books. Well, the union guys in the private sector are kind of incentivized, right? They're kind of incentivized to work with management to get as much as they can without having the whole thing fall flat in its face. Because if they ask for too much and the business collapses, then everyone's out of a job and the game's over, and that's that. But in RTE, SIP2 has no such incentive, because it knows, as well as you know and I know, that RTE cannot go to the wall. It will not be allowed to go to the wall. The government has made absolutely clear it won't be allowed to go to the wall. So it knows that it's actually doing RTE management a favour, because RTE management has to go through this whole kind of we're going to be delivering better value for money, and we're going to introduce reforms, and we're going to cut costs, which is all PR. And the unions can play the baddie and go, no, you're not. No, you're not. We're gonna stick on our salaries and that's it. And then RTE management can say, well, we're going to go bankrupt if we don't get more money from the taxpayer, and the taxpayer is going to fork it over, because the politicians that we have across all political parties, bar maybe Ain't an Independent Ireland, think that RTE is brilliant and we can't let it go to the wall, and they want to tax you more to fund it. So why would SIP2 and RTE agree to anything?
But that's what it
They'd be
is.
idiots.
You're just watching this little silly little dance,
Mhm.
and taking the public for mugs, and nothing will change. And yeah, and as you say, there's no political will, and the energy has gone out of the rage has gone out of the public. And
Mhm.
that's the Irish way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have an investigation, have a committee, have a tribunal, have a this, and kick it down the road so long. Have a report, and that basically by the time it actually comes around, the public have kind of lost interest in it. The heat's gone out of it, and then you can do what you want.
Yeah. And that's what'll happen here. Like this package of reform being rejected by the unions. Look, I'd be very surprised if we see a new package of reforms brought back or a strike or anything like that. Everyone knows what their job is here. Everyone knows what their job is, and the ultimate job it's to extract more money from the taxpayer, and that will succeed because there's no one willing to say if you actually want to reform RTE, the first thing government should say is it's getting no more money and it's going to go to the wall. Then I suspect you see the unions and management coming to a fairly quick agreement on how to make things more efficient. But the government has no intention of doing that. We have one more thing that I said we'd talk about on the podcast, which was actually there was two more things. We'll do cost of living first because it's more important. The CSO had figures out this week. Sarah saying that the price of making a pancake was up 35% in I think 3 years. Have you? Did you make pancakes first of all?
It is. I'd never be allowed away with it.
Yeah. My wife is not here this week. She's away, so I've just been at home with me and the dog, and I made pancakes for myself and the dog, and they were delicious. I was actually really delighted because not only did I make pancakes, I was happy, first of all, that I just didn't burn the house down, but second of all, they actually ended up in kind of like approximately a pancake shape, which I was very proud of, as opposed to just kind of like, kind of vaguely cooked dough in balls,
So you're
which is what
just sitting at home, the wife's away, making yourself pancakes and listening to Barbara Streisand, are you?
yeah,
What
pretty
an
much.
age.
Pretty much.
So that means that it's what? Milk, eggs, and flour.
Mm-hmm. And sugar.
Well, actually,
Milk, eggs, flour, and sugar.
the batter shouldn't have sugar in it, in my opinion. But anyway.
Well, that's what they included. That's what the CSO included in their basket. Milk, eggs, flour, and sugar.
Well, I mean, that's no surprise, is it? Everything's more expensive. Every food shop, everything is more expensive. And it goes off the agenda a lot, I find. Because I think that a lot of people are feeling it, but it kind of gets a bit of tension sometimes, and then it goes off the political agenda for a while. And it suits them for it to be off the agenda because there's no real answer to it. But yeah, I mean, I would think 33%, 33 to 50% would be the increase in, I would say, on most things within the last few years.
But that's extraordinary. I mean, nobody's salary in this country, if they're doing the same job that they were doing 3 years ago, nobody's salary has increased by 35 to 50% for doing the same work that they were doing. And yet the foodstuffs in that same time have increased by 35 to 50% in cost. That's real. That's a real, like, people getting worse off by the day. Okay, so maybe 35% price of eggs or milk or whatever those things. Butter, for example, which I think it's an article in last year. Butter, I think, has gone from like €3 a pound to like £5.50 a pound, for example. You don't notice yourself getting poorer by the 250s every time you go to the shop, but they all add up and people are getting poorer. And I think one of the reasons it's not on the political agenda is that people are getting poorer as a direct and intended result of government policy. Like direct and intended, in that the aim of government policy, specifically as it relates to staple goods, i.e. those produced mainly in Irish agriculture, has been to make them more expensive. Because if you make them more expensive, we use less of them, and if we use less of them, we produce less carbon. And this is all tied to the government's plan to reduce carbon by 2030, which means that, for example, we have reduced the national herd in terms of cattle by about 7% over the last couple of years. At the same time as we've increased the population and increased demand, we've enforced nitrates directives and more restrictions on farming that make it more expensive to produce milk. And the objective of policy has been to increase demand, reduce supply, drive up the price with the objective that we consume less of these carbon-intensive Irish farming goods. And that is the objective of Irish government policy as it relates to climate change, and no one wants to talk about it.
Mm. We do.
No?
But yeah, I mean, but that's the point, that there's a sort of it's convenient to never talk about it, to never drill down into the reason why things go up. I mean, I saw somebody saying that, I think it was Glenna Lynch or somebody on Twitter just saying that we'll be living with the consequences of the Greens period in government for a long, long, long time.
But it's not just the Greens, though, is it? It's the civil service, it's the institutions of the state. The Greens were brilliant. Like, politically, they were brilliant. They inserted key personnel right across the board. Commission de Man, various environmental agencies, all these state boards where you've got Green people. Greens are gone. The Greens are the ghost. They've only got Roderick O'Gorman, but their appointees linger on. And what's more, we just don't have the caliber of politicians. I said this to, a Fine Gael senator who will remain nameless about a year ago. And I was like, it's your policy to make everything more expensive. He said, no, it's not. I said, yes, it is. And I walked him through it. And I said, this is the objective of climate policy. The only way it works, the only way climate policy works, the only way we get to net zero is if people eat less milk, eat less meat, drink less milk, use their car less and use less electricity. How do you do that? Well, the Green Party had a solution, which is you drive up the price of everything and then consumption of it falls. He was like, oh, Jesus, I never thought of it like that. I'm sorry, but that's the problem. Like, we have politicians who actually are pursuing government policies and they don't understand the purpose of the policies they're pursuing. And we have voters who don't care. And if you say something like, because they make you sound like a conspiracy theorist, you say, oh, the price of milk has gone up because the government wants the price of milk to go up to save the planet. People are like, no, you're codding me there. No, I'm not. That's actually the policy. And people just refuse to believe it because we're still in that kind of like, Ireland is an independent country. We're not occupied by the Brits. We're all on the same side. People don't want to believe that their own politicians can deliberately act against their interests in the interests of, in this case, saving Gen 2 penguins in the South Pacific who will, first of all, not be saved by the action that we're doing, and second of all, don't realize we exist.
It's hard to disagree with anything you've just said there. It's kind of depressing, though. Do you not want to end the podcast on something uplifting, John?
I do. Do you have an uplifting story for me?
No.
The one thing I mentioned at the start that we haven't talked about is, of course, your favorite topic, which is, you said it was Canada. I'm nearly convinced this was in Connecticut or something like that. This very muscly woman who killed her wife and children.
Were you trying to annoy me by saying woman? It was a man.
Yes, I was. Yeah, well, I'd say this female crime, you just can't. You can't.
It's really on the uptick, isn't it?
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, what can you say? Another one. Horrific. A man has just killed his family, his wife and his children, or at least one of his children, for reasons surrounding the fact that they won't accept that he has decided to live his life as a woman. But, nothing to see here, John.
It is. I think there is, because you have to be very careful when you're talking. Not to be very careful. It's not that I'm so politically correct that I want to be very careful. But I think it is important to say that despite what your political opinion of them be, it is statistically true that the vast overwhelming majority of transgender people will never do harm to anyone in their life. Statistics.
We don't say that, but our political classes don't say that about boys. Not funny.
No, they don't. Coming back to that. However, so I had a however there, which is, we can also say statistically, based on, and we discussed the figures last week, like transgender women, i.e. people who are born men who now call themselves women, are statistically far more likely to kill you than regular old women, the old-fashioned ones that don't have cocks, those ones. Sorry. Credit to Ricky Gervais for that joke. But the old-fashioned ones are less likely to kill you than the newfangled ones. That's fair thing to say. I don't know if we could say much more than that.
I think that would be mathematically provable.
Yes, I think it is. I think people have mathematically proven it. Anyway, look, we'll leave it there. We've covered everything I said we would cover at the start of the podcast, which is rare and good. I also want to say there was a massively popular viral tweet this week about artificial intelligence that I kind of halfway through the podcast when you're talking about corporate tax, I kind of wanted to get in and talk about that. I have written about it in my email to Gript subscribers this week, which was out on Friday. If you're a subscriber, you get that. If you are not a subscriber, I just want to say I would very much like it if you would become one. We do a lot of work here at Gript, and I think it's valuable work. And we do need your support. We need your support to grow. So if you're somebody who enjoys this podcast every week and you enjoy myself and Sarah, and indeed our other offerings and our other video output on this channel, and indeed our articles, then we are the only media outlet in the country that does not take a single red cent in government money. And I mean, we're the only one. We don't take government advertising, we don't take direct funding, we don't take grants, because that's the only way that we remain independent. So if you are listening to this podcast and you have a tenner a month to spare, I think it's money well spent, and it's going to support a good cause, even if you don't think it's actual value for money, which I think it is. But if you don't, just consider a donation to a good cause. We would appreciate it. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I won't frustrate myself anymore. I've been John. She's been Sarah. This has been The Week That Really Was. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a week. Bye.